good to see everybody tonight. We'll be in Daniel chapter 7. Before we begin, we'll start with a word of prayer. So bow with me. Our dear Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for this day that you've given us. We thank you for this time we can set aside to come together to study from your word. And we pray that we can take these lessons and make application to our lives to help us see better what we're supposed to be doing here and now. We ask that you be with all those who are traveling and those who are sick and all of our loved ones who are in need of your care. We ask that you be with them. We pray this in Christ's name. Amen. All right, first I want to say thank you to Kevin for teaching the class for me last week. I really appreciate that. I was out of town on business in the D.C. area, and Ryan Giesing and Kate, Ryan texted me today, said that he's in D.C. this week on a field trip. Some popular place, I guess. But I was not wearing matching T-shirts like all the other people I saw up there. Anyway, thank you, Kevin, for teaching for me last week. Last week we talked about Daniel chapter 6, and tonight we'll talk about Daniel chapter 7. And I want to start with, we'll get to this picture in a little bit, but that picture right there is taken from Istanbul. It hangs in Istanbul, is what I was told just a little bit earlier. Eric was telling me that it was something, he has pictures on his phone where he was there and has pictures of this. So, but we'll talk more about that in just a minute. So remember a few weeks ago we were talking about this chiastic pattern and how the chiastic pattern is a form of poetry or a type of poetry used in some of these Old Testament writings, and it was a way of emphasizing a point of what's going on in the book. And so at the beginning, Daniel chapter 2, he had visions of 4 kingdoms where God rules in the kingdom of men. And then tonight, we're going to finish that chiastic pattern of Daniel chapter 7. We'll be talking a vision of 4 kingdoms where God rules in the kingdom of men. So you can see that it's almost exactly the same subject matter anyway of what it is. And the whole key of this is that God, the Most High God, is the one who is in control. He is the one who rules all and is over all. And so that's framing the chapters 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. You got Daniel chapter 2, and you wrap it up with Daniel chapter 7. And so I think we're all familiar enough with that. Any questions on a chiastic pattern? Okay. So let's talk about this also. In this letter, or in this chapter, actually it's the end of this chapter, from at the beginning all the way back there in Daniel chapter 2 through the end of chapter 7, most of the Old Testament writing was done in Hebrew language. And this portion from chapter 2 through chapter 7 was written in Aramaic. And there's a few places in the Old Testament where that happens, but almost everything in the Old Testament was written originally in Hebrew, except for just a few sections. And so this verse in Genesis, there's just one verse there that there's one word actually in that verse that was written in Aramaic. And then in Jeremiah, the same thing. And then Ezra, there's 3 different spots where things were written in Aramaic and not in Hebrew. But then we've got in Daniel these chapters 2 through 7 where they were written in Aramaic. Any guess on why everything else was written in Hebrew, but this was written in Aramaic? Any thoughts on that? Jim? Okay, that's a very good reason. I mean, they were in captivity in Babylon, and it's talking about those things, and so to write it in that language would make sense. Any other thoughts on why perhaps it was written in Aramaic? And I think that's a good answer. Eric?
Daniel, I think it was written in that language so that non-Jews could understand it. Whereas, when you're getting down to this stuff that's in Hebrew, they don't care if Nebuchadnezzar was about that.
Right. And I think that's a very good reason why, because there's certain words in the Genesis and the Jeremiah and Ezra, there's words that were written in Aramaic, but these whole chapters were written that way because the audience was meant to be more than just the Hebrew audience. The idea is that God wanted more than just the people of Israel or Judah to know what's going on. And what is the subject matter that we've been talking about? That the Most High God is the ruler of all things. Not just, it's not just written to Jews or Israelites. It's written, really, this message is for everybody, not just for us or them at the time. It's for all of us. All right. Okay, so now we'll get into the meat of chapter 7. Any other comments before we do that? All right. In Daniel chapter 7, verses 1 through 8, I'm going to read verse 1 to start with. In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel saw a dream and visions of his head as he lay in his bed. And he wrote down the dream and told the sum of the matter. So in the other dreams that we've seen, he's been interpreting dreams that somebody else had. But this time he has the dream and he writes down what the dream was. And you'll see that he gets a little bit of help in interpreting it. It's not exactly the same kind of happenings that took place before, but now he's the one that has the dream and he writes it down. And I put this picture on the left, which is the golden-headed statue from chapter 2. And as we go through here, you're going to notice that, and I realize this might be spoiling it, whatever, but that's the whole point of this chapter, is to see that these things line up. The one on the left, as you go through and read it, it lines up with these beasts that we're going to read about in chapter 7. And I'm a very visual person, and then reading this chapter, I was telling Josh either yesterday or today that it was difficult because when I'm reading it, it's very descriptive of what these things look like. And they're things that we don't see in our normal world. And for me to try to understand what I'm reading about, it's difficult because, I like to, like the statue, I could read that and it said it had a head of gold. Well, I know what a head is. I know what gold is. And I've seen statues that are made out of these different materials. But we're about to read chapter 7, it says things that I've never seen in real life. And so it's hard to describe it or understand what I'm reading about. And that's another reason why I put the picture up there initially, just so you guys can see it as we're reading it. And not to say that this picture is perfect, but it gives you a lot better idea than, at least in my mind, when I'm reading it and trying to make it heads or tails of what this is. So let's start by reading the first 8 verses. And read with me. You can follow along and also look at the pictures if it helps. So I'm going to start in chapter 7, verse 2. Daniel declared, I saw in my vision by night, and behold, the 4 winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea, and 4 great beasts came up out of the sea, different from one another. The first was like a lion and had eagle's wings. Then as I looked, its wings were plucked off, and it was lifted up from the ground and made to stand on 2 feet like a man. And the mind of a man was given to it. And behold, another beast, a second one, like a bear. It was raised up on one side. It had 3 ribs in its mouth, between its teeth, and it was told, "Arise, devour much flesh." After this I looked, and behold, another, like a leopard, with 4 wings of a bird on its back. And the beast had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. And after this I saw in the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast, terrifying and dreadful and exceedingly strong. It had iron teeth. It devoured and broke in pieces and stamped what was left with its feet. It was different from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. I considered the horns, and behold, there came up among them another horn, a little one, before which 3 of the first horns were plucked out by the roots. And behold, in this horn were eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking great things. That's kind of how I was when I read it. Sarah's like, got these eyes. I don't know. Am I the only one who thinks this is hard to grasp? I mean, well, I'm glad that he gives us interpretation. Any comments? All right, I'm going to read some more. Let's go to verses 15. We're going to jump up to verses 15 through 27, and this is going to be the interpretation of it. As for me, Daniel, my spirit within me was anxious. I can imagine that. And the visions of my head alarmed me. I approached one of those who stood there and asked him the truth concerning all this. So he told me and made known to me the interpretation of the things. These 4 great beasts are 4 kings who shall arise out of the earth. But the saints of the Most High shall receive the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever and ever. I'll stop right there. That reminds me of the statue, and not pictured in this picture. When we had the picture the last time in chapter 2, I had the statue standing in front of a mountain and a rock coming out of the mountain that was not carved by or hewn by hands, human hands. It was just something that was coming out, and that was this next kingdom that was going to be of the Most High God. Well, can you see the imagery of what we just read? It's basically the same thing, just different visions of interpreting or just different visions of being the same type of scenario. Verse 19. Then I desired to know the truth about the 4th beast, which was different from all the rest, exceedingly terrifying, with its teeth of iron and claws of bronze, and which devoured and broke in pieces and stamped what was left with its feet. And about the 10 horns that were on its head, and the other horn that came up, and before which 3 of them fell, the horn that had eyes and a mouth that spoke great things, and that seemed greater than its companions. As I looked, this horn made war with the saints and prevailed over them, until the Ancient of Days came, and judgment was given for the saints of the Most High at the time came when the saints possessed the kingdom. And thus he said, verse 23, as for the 4th beast, there shall be a 4th kingdom on earth, which shall be different from all the kingdoms, and it shall devour the whole earth, and trample down and break it to pieces. As for the 10 horns, out of this kingdom 10 kings shall arise, and another shall arise after them. He shall be different from the former ones, and shall put down 3 kings. He shall speak words against the Most High, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and shall think to change the times and the law, and they shall be given into his hand for a time, times and half a time. But the court shall sit in judgment, and his dominion shall be taken away, to be consumed and destroyed to the end. And the kingdom and the dominion and the greatness of the kingdoms under the whole heaven shall be given to the people of the saints of the Most High. His kingdom shall be an everlasting kingdom, and all dominions shall serve and obey him. So again, with this imagery, we see that these 4 beasts represent these other kingdoms that not all of them had taken place yet. You know, when this is going on, we're in the Babylonian period. So we're still at that head of gold when this is going on. Now, this was not Nebuchadnezzar while he had this dream, but he was still under the Babylonian time when this happened. And then we know from the last classes that we have just gone through that the Medes and Persians come in and take over. So, if you make a prediction about something and then that thing comes true, what does that tell you about the prediction that you had just heard? Usually it tells me that, well, I guess we know that the guy knew what he was talking about. It's kind of been proven, right? So at this point in time, we don't know exactly that all these things are going to take place, but if one of them has, or two of them has, you got the golden head, and then you've got the chest of silver, and then you got these other two beasts, it'd be kind of scary to think, these things are really true. But the whole point of the matter is that the Most High God is the one who's in control, not these individual kings or rulers of the land. And as us, as people, don't we usually put a lot of we put a lot of stock in our leaders? We think that they're very powerful and they can do all these things because they have so much authority and they have all these resources and they can do, build roads, build walls, build whatever it is they need to do. They can do it. They're not the ones in control. God is in control. All right. Let's combine these two sections as we go. So we read between the first section, verses 1 through 8, and then we read the next section through 28 or through 27. But we're going to look at the vision and we're going to look at the interpretations together. So here's another picture of what these beasts may have looked like. They don't look very natural, though, do they? The vision and the interpretations. In chapter 7 and verse 3, it says, "And 4 great beasts came up out of the sea, different from one another." So these 4 great beasts have come up out of the sea. And then in verse 17, if you look at verse 17, you'll see another part of the interpretation. "These 4 great beasts are 4 kings who shall arise out of the earth." Okay, so the beasts are coming up out of the sea, but the kings are coming up out of the earth. I want to make a note about something that we see in the Bible, that the sea, S-E-A, the sea, is not really a friendly place. It's not really described as like we talk about going to the beach, and we think that that's really cool. But when you're talking about the sea is where bad things took place. Go to Genesis chapter 1, verses 1 and 2, during the creation of the world. In Genesis 1, verses 1 and 2, it says, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters." The face of the deep, the face of the waters, it was dark. Those represent chaotic things. Think about when Jesus calmed the sea and the winds and the waves, and he was able to, by his word, calm the sea. But the sea was a dangerous place. The sea can devour man and but these beasts came up out of the sea. So just think about that. These beasts are bad. They're mean. And they came up out of where it's bad and mean. And in Revelation, verses 21, or chapter 21 of Revelation, in verse 1, another idea of the sea not being a friendly place. Verse 1 of chapter 21, Revelation, "Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and the sea was no more." All right. So then go to Daniel chapter 7, back to verse 4. We'll go to the vision again. "The first was like a lion, and he had eagle's wings." Oh, there's the lion, and he has wings of an eagle. Um, Pretty awesome, right? When I was a kid, I was in a club and I made it up myself. But me and a couple friends from the street, down the street, we had our bikes and we got T-shirts made, and we were the Golden Eagles, right? And we had Golden Eagles on because that was tough, you know. Yeah. Daniel chapter 7, verse 4. The first was like a lion and had eagle's wings, and it looked like its wings were plucked off, and it was lifted up from the ground and made to stand on 2 feet like a man, and the mind of a man was given to it. What does a lion and an eagle make you think of? When you think of a lion or an eagle, what do you think of? John?
Those are both the two, like, top predators, just like the baddest of bad.
Yeah, like the lion is the king of the jungle, right? And then eagle, I don't know much about birds. If Ryan was in here, he might know more. But they're the top of the food chain, I would say, the eagles are. Dave?
I think about, I can hide from a lion, or if I can get to a high spot in a tree, I can get away from the lion perhaps. But if it's got wings, where could I go?
Yeah.
What could I do to hide from it? It seems that it's got every single predatory advantage to just destroy.
Yeah, so a lion by itself is a vicious predator that they can pounce on you. But can you imagine if that lion was able to fly? Let's just imagine that. And here in, I don't know about Ellisville because I haven't seen them here, but in Eureka, out by the wastewater treatment plant, we have eagles that nest up there during parts of the year, and they fly around, and they're huge. They get close to your car when you're driving around. You can see how big they are. They're huge, but I can't imagine if I saw a lion. I don't know. That'd be bad. And then, what else think about royalty. When you think of a lion or an eagle and royalty, do we have any ideas with that? The King of England, I think their coat of arms maybe has a lion in it, maybe. I don't know. I didn't really look. I just remember in my mind, it makes me think that, something from the King of England has a lion. And what's our United States national animal? It's an eagle, right? So those are royal things or prestigious things. And that cross-references in chapter 2 with the head of gold. All right, Daniel interprets this in verse 31. That in Daniel chapter 2, verse 31, he talks about the great image of the head of gold and how that's part of the interpretation. One's the head of gold on the statue and the other's the eagle. Lions were widely represented in Babylon. And that's this slide here. When you were walking through Babylon, this is what Eric told me today. I'll see if I get it right. When you're walking through the gates in Babylon, you're walking towards a temple, you're going to see these without authority. Okay.
And they just got displays showing those.
So in the museum in Istanbul, you see these things as you walk through. But these are from Babylon, but they were taken. I don't know how they were taken, but they were moved from there, and now they're in this museum in Istanbul. But that's a kingly thing, that lion. And then in this representation that we just read, it talked about these lion wings got plucked off. The wings of the eagle on the lion got plucked off. What does that make you think of? Have you ever plucked a chicken? You ever taken the wings off a chicken? That's as close to this imagery as I've ever done. How did that chicken feel when you took its wings off? I would imagine humiliated, defeated, and he can't fly anymore. That's the idea of taking these wings off of that lion. And in Daniel chapter 4, we saw that Nebuchadnezzar was humbled. In verse 33, it said, immediately the words were fulfilled against Nebuchadnezzar. He was driven from among men, ate grass like an ox, and his body was wet with the dew of heaven, till his hair grew long as eagle's feathers, and his nails were like bird's claws. But he was humiliated because he didn't do what he knew. He had already been told, don't do this, and he did it. And then also Belshazzar, he was defeated. Remember a couple weeks ago we talked about that, and you saw the handwriting on the wall, and then that very night he died. And Darius the Mede received the kingdom. He was humiliated. The wings were plucked off the lion. All right, verse 5, Daniel 7, verse 5. Go back to that. And behold, another beast, a second one, like a bear. It was raised up on one side. It had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth, and it was told, arise and devour much flesh. So this one, kind of hard to picture, except, I mean, the bear, I get that. I've seen bears in movies, you know, I've seen them at the zoo. They're big, they have huge paws. But this one talks about being raised up. Maybe it's malformed a little bit, raised up on one side, but it has 3 ribs in its mouth. What does that mean? It has 3 ribs in its mouth. Have you ever seen animals devouring something? And what do they? I'm going to liken it to a dog. When a dog is going through a carcass and you come up on him, he'll take something that he's been chewing on and he'll take off with it, right? So I can just imagine that this bear has been devouring something, and whatever he has been devouring is still there in its mouth, these 3 ribs that are in its mouth, and that's what he's been chomping on. What are those 3 things? I don't know exactly, but go to this slide. The Persian Empire, that's this one that that's the bear, the Persian Empire. And see how this Persian Empire, in landmass anyway, looks bigger in one area than the other. And it talked about the bear was raised up on one side. You know, maybe that's kind of the imagery that we're seeing. And then it has these 3 ribs. There's lots of ideas about what these 3 ribs are. I don't know exactly what they are. But this is the next kingdom. I'll go back here first. I want to go to this. The 3 ribs, this is somebody's idea of what the 3 ribs are. The Medes and the Persians, there were 2 empires, but they kind of joined forces. But before all this happened, the Persians in 525 BC, they toppled Egypt in 525. So that was a kingdom. And then in 615, assisted by the Babylonians, the ones that they actually take over, you know, the Medes and the Persians take over Babylon. But before that happened, with the assistance of the Babylonians, the Medes toppled the Assyrians in 615. So that's number 2. And then the Medes and the Persians together toppled Babylon. So that's number 3. So perhaps these 3 ribs in its mouth represent those 3 kingdoms. You know, they're portions of those kingdoms that they've already devoured. Your guess is as good as mine, but that's what some scholars have said. And I'm not going to say that it's exactly what it is, but Josh is giving me a head like, yeah, it's good enough explanation. So Daniel chapter 7 and verse 6 and 7. After this I looked, and behold, another, like a leopard, with 4 wings of a bird on its back. And the beast had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. After this I saw in the night visions, and behold, the 4th beast, terrifying and dreadful and exceedingly strong. It had iron teeth. It devoured and broke in pieces and stamped what was left with its feet. It was different from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. So at the beginning of chapter 7, verse 6a, the first half there, it says it's like a leopard with 4 wings of a bird on its back. And this one is Greece, okay? And Greece was ruled by Alexander the Great. And when he died, he didn't have any heirs. And his empire was divided among 4 of his generals. And this was called the Diadochi. And you can see the post-Alexander there on the right. You had these different kingdoms, and they're colored such over here. So when we go back to the picture, you have the leopard, and the leopard had 4 heads, okay? But what else is it about a leopard? What do you think of when you think of a leopard? Jim? Quickness. Yeah, so how would you equate quickness to the Greek Empire? Right. By the time he was 32 years old, he had already conquered everything in that map, and that was in 13 years. So how fast, that seems pretty fast. He really compounded his area of control in a short amount of time. And so a leopard is very much like a lion. I would be very scared if I saw a leopard, just like I would be a lion, but a leopard's really fast. How fast is a leopard? Does anybody know? Ben? You have any idea? You're like a leopard. I've seen you lay brick. 39 miles per hour. That's fast, though, for a cat, 39 miles per hour. And then how fast are eagles when they fly? Eagles are fast, up to 75 to 100 miles per hour that they can fly. And that's a golden eagle. Bald eagles are a little bit slower. So I looked it up. That's what Google said. But Alexander the Great, he is this leopard, his kingdom, the Greek Empire, and he died with no heir, and his 4 generals took it. Okay. And then the next kingdom there is the Roman Empire. So let's look at verse 7. In Daniel 7 and verse 7. After this, hang on. Okay, the 4th beast is Rome. Let's go to verse 23. That's where the interpretation is. As for the 4th beast, there shall be a 4th kingdom on earth, which shall be different from all the kingdoms, and it shall devour the whole earth and trample it down and break it into pieces. And it had 10 horns, and out of this kingdom 10 kings shall arise, and another shall arise after them. He shall be different from the former ones, and he shall put down 3 kings. These words that are describing this are terrifying, dreadful, exceedingly strong, great iron teeth that devoured. 10 horns. What does a horn represent? In these royalty terms, a horn is power. A horn is strength. A horn is power. Think of Boss Hogg. He was the ruler, right? He's the judge, and he had horns on his car. I don't know. Jake, my son-in-law, had some of those on his truck when he moved up here, and one of them fell off while he's driving down I-44. Nobody got hurt. Somebody got them though. But 10 horns. These have 10 horns. So if 1 horn is power, 10 horns is big power. And this beast is from the Roman Empire. That's the Roman Empire. And you can see it takes even more land than the other kingdoms that had come before it. In the next coming chapters, if you think this chapter is difficult to understand, stay tuned. We're going to talk more throughout the rest of this quarter, and it gets even more, I think, challenging to make the interpretations or make understanding of what it is. I don't think it's big picture. I don't think it's that hard to figure it out. But if you start looking at the little details, it's a lot. And we're going to talk more about these horns in the next chapters in the next coming weeks. I have a note in my ESV study Bible that says the beasts in general show the present world order as an ongoing state of violence and lust for power that will continue until the final coming of God's kingdom. So, all right. Let's go to verse 9 through 14. Daniel 7, verse 9 through 14. The Ancient of Days reigns. Verse 9. As I looked, thrones were placed, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. His clothing was white as snow, and the hair of his head like pure wool. His throne was fiery flames. Its wheels were burning fire. A stream of fire issued and came out from before him. 1,000,000 served him, and 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The court sat in judgment, and the books were opened. I looked, then because of the sound of the great words that the horn was speaking, and as I looked, the beast was killed, and its body destroyed, and given over to be burned with fire. As for the rest of the beasts, their dominion was taken away, but their lives were prolonged for a season and a time. I saw in the night visions, and behold, with the clouds of heaven there came one like a son of man, and he came to the Ancient of Days, and was presented before him. And to him was given dominion and glory, and a kingdom that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion, which shall not pass away, and his kingdom one that shall not be destroyed. So when we read this, we can see that these beasts that came before out of the sea, and then the men that were the kings that came up out of the ground, each one of them had an end date, had an expiration date. They had an ending time of their reign. But this Ancient of Days, the Most High, his is an everlasting kingdom. And as we talked about in chapter 2, this is the kingdom of God, the kingdom of heaven, the kingdom that Jesus is ruling over. And that's in charge of everything now, even today. Even though these kingdoms are defeated, the world still continues to be ruled by kingdoms of man until the Christ's second coming. You know, we still have rulers of the nations now. But these are not the ultimate powers, the rulers of our world. God is in control. In verse 13, it says, one like a son of man. Does that strike any thoughts in your mind when we're in Daniel chapter 7, but you hear these words, like a son of man? Who does that make you think of? Jesus. Who said that? Somebody back there. Jesus. Yes. Did you say it, John? All right. People were pointing, your voice was throwing. I think it's that mustache. Y'all should check it out. It looks good. Proud of him. It's like a son of man. This is Jesus' preferred title for himself. And in the Gospels, when he called himself this, it would have made people really pay attention. Can you imagine you're sitting there and Jesus is talking and he calls himself the Son of Man, and you're of Jewish descent, and you hear Jesus say this, and you know about Daniel, and you know that it talks about the Son of Man replacing these other kingdoms, and now he's going to be ruling. When Jesus calls himself this, I imagine it would raise some eyebrows. But in Matthew chapter 8 and verse 20, and Jesus said to him, Matthew 8 and 20, foxes have holes and birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. And again in Mark chapter 14, verses 61 through 62, but he remained silent and made no answer. Again the high priest asked him, are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed? And Jesus said, I am. And you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming with the clouds of heaven. You can imagine when he said these things, that their thoughts would go back to what they've known about Daniel. And also remember what we said about Daniel, these chapters were not written just in, or they were written in Aramaic. So the audience wasn't just Jews. Other people would have known this too. But the key verse of this chapter is verse 14. In Daniel 7 and verse 14. And to him was given dominion and glory and a kingdom, that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion, which shall not pass away, and his kingdom one that shall not be destroyed. I feel like because we're sitting in a period of time where this is old news, like we've already heard this story before, and we're living in this period of time. It's not as profound maybe to us to hear these things, but if you are especially one of these kings that he's being talked about, the Babylonian king or the Medo-Persian king or the Greek emperor or king and the Roman emperor, or if you're just people that are being taken captive of and you're not sure what's going on, but to know that God, the Most High God, is in control and he is going to rule over all things, that's a lot. And it should be a lot to us still today. You know, we can get caught up in the politics or just the going ins and out of this world and forget that God is in control. And when we forget that God is in control, we usually forget how to run ourselves in this world. And we you know, it's like a dog chasing a squirrel, just wherever it goes, and then that's what we do. But we're not really paying attention to what our real mission is to be, and that's to serve God and to spread his word and to try to get as many people as we can to point them to Christ so that they can be a part of this kingdom as well. Jim?
I was going to ask, it's obvious that Jesus came to come the end of that 4 weeks moment. His kingdom came. The verse 12, I assume that's kind of where we're at. These other kingdoms have kind of been allowed a period of time. We're in that period of time now.
Yeah. I would assume that that's right. You know, this world is still ruled by men, but ultimately the Most High is in control. And until Christ comes again, there's going to be these rulers of other nations and things. So I think that's what that would interpret to be. Any other comments on that? All right. Let's just read a couple more things. Verses 17 and 18. These 4 great beasts are 4 kings who shall rise out of the earth, but the saints of the Most High shall receive the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever, forever, and ever. That's us, right? We're a part of that if we're a part of God's kingdom, that we will be in that kingdom, and that kingdom will rule forever and ever and ever. And then in verse 27, the same thing. And the kingdom and the dominion and the greatness of the kingdoms under the whole heaven shall be given to the people of the saints of the Most High. His kingdom shall be an everlasting kingdom, and all dominion shall serve and obey him. So if you take anything out of this, just take it that even back in this time when Daniel was presenting this, that the Most High God is the ruler of all. And he's telling them that even though some of these kingdoms haven't come into place yet. And we're sitting in a position in time where we can see that these things actually did take place. One of the things I take away from that is these predictions or prophecies were made and then come true, I should not doubt the other things that God has said that I should or should not do. I should listen to those things and take heed of those things and live my life in accordance with knowing how to live it based on the things that He's told me. And then I should try to teach others the same thing. All right. You guys did well. Thank you for sitting through that with me. Next week will be chapter 8. Next week after that is chapter 9. And I will be out of town again. Jesse Vaughn is going to teach that one for me. So thank you for your attention.